Hi, I'm Tim and welcome to Watch You Want. Thanks for logging on. You just heard the Blancpain Leman GMT Alarm East Coast Jewelry Limited Edition 20th Anniversary Edition speaking to you in its own voice. Now, this is one of 20 built in 2006 for the 20th anniversary of East Coast Jewelry, a South Florida upscale boutique institution of sorts. Now, this watch, which represents the absolute top of the line of Blancpain's high horology capabilities, everything from the alarm to the GMT to the packaging thereof in a finely finished 40mm stainless steel case, speaks to the competence of this storied manufacturer. Now, Swatch Group is the world's largest luxury watch manufacturer. You may know them for Flick Flack and Swatch affordable watches, but they're actually a complex pyramid, starting with those entry-level plastic quartz watches at the bottom and rising to the true haut de gamme, the high horology, the top of the line, capped by Blancpain, the tip of the spear, where each watch is manufactured by one watchmaker using low-volume techniques in the most traditional workshop fashion. That's how you get everything from the alarm to the GMT to finish worthy of Geneva's finest. Now, the bottom line is that this watch gives you a lot to hold on to, so we're going to break it down bit by bit, talk a little bit about the special edition components that make this unique to East Coast jewelry, and then talk about the Blancpain heritage, talk about the La Brasseux roots and techniques that drive the design and watchmaking, the features, and how it's finished. So we're going to go from the very specific to the general, but first we need to talk about the wrist fit, because the wrist impression is the heart and soul of every watch review. You can see that on my wrist, 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters, this watch fits incredibly flush, comfortable, light, flat. It's an automatic winder with a tremendous amount of content built into it. We'll get to that in a moment with a little bit of a dial tour to walk around all those features, but you can see that the word here is seamless. From the way the short, thick lugs curve over my wrist to the rounded case back that sits tightly but gently nestled upon the top of my wrist, to that gorgeous rubber-coated leather strap that's quite supple and yet conforms with no gap to the flanks of the case, to the curvature of case, to the curvature of the lugs. Everything about this watch is elegant and comfortable, and it's got just enough heft to feel like a premium product, but it's not heavy, it's not obtrusive, it's not insistent. A gorgeous look with a stepped bezel and a high polish redolent of quality that give it more wrist presence than its bare 40mm would suggest. On paper it's a 40, but like a lot of contemporary Rolex watches, it wears bigger, it looks bigger. So the next step after discussing fit, finish, strap, and case is to move inward to the dial itself, and I really want to focus on all of the elements of the dial. You have the East Coast specific elements, the yellow highlights, the yellow skeletonized hour and minutes hands. You see those elements because that is the signature color of East Coast jewelry. It's kind of a South Florida thing, a subtropic zone thing. It's a beach color. People paint their houses and their Rolls Royces that color down here. If you're in a Miami mindset, even if you're just coming down to Florida for the winter, trust me, this is the feeling, this is the spirit of the moment when you're here. It's the terroir, the spirit of the land down in Miami. And it's a gorgeous complement to this gloss black lacquered Blancpain dial. Now, the Le Mans lacquered black Blancpain dial has tremendous resolution. Every piece of guilloche, every individually cut line and texture, every reflective surface absolutely jumps. This is not matte black. It's not an unobtrusive black. It's got personality. It's animated. It's got a life to it. And it shifts as you move the watch through the light. Just like the yellow, it seems to jump off the dial at you. So it's tremendously engaging. Again, I think it just helps to add to the presence and personality of this watch, which is why I feel it wears visually so much bigger than 40mm. But let's talk about complication, because there's an awful lot of it. Now, there's a switching mechanism at 12 o'clock that represents the on-off. You can see those little sword hands around the dial on the subdials. On-off for the alarm. Self-explanatory, easy to understand, highly accessible. Move right next to it, going counterclockwise, and you see a second hand. That is your alarm power reserve. That tells you the status of the alarm. This is an automatic winding watch. It's the only one I know of that winds both the alarm power reserve and the mainspring balance power reserve off the automatic winding system. Every other alarm watch that I've ever encountered needs to be manually wound up in order to sound off the alarm. Even if it's an automatic watch, every other alarm watch I've seen has no inherent function to wind its own alarm. This one does, and that's exceptional. The fact that they packed all that into a 13mm thick case blows my mind. But the bottom line is that you have a power reserve for the alarm, because the idea being with a constant seconds indicator at 6 o'clock, you know if the balance is in action, so you know if there's mainspring power. What you don't necessarily know just by glancing at the dial is whether the alarm will be there when you need to rely on it. Hence, Blancpain gives you a power reserve. At 9 o'clock, a 24-hour dial. This is the GMT alarm, after all, so there's a second time zone, demarcated in individual hours, run out to 24 total, so you know if your reference time is, for instance, 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. Constant seconds at 6 o'clock. There is a date disc, beautifully color coordinated, black the disc itself, yellow the numerals. Coordinated with the dial, there's a consistent color palette that runs throughout the watch, and the date disc continues that trend. It's an upscale feature, I feel, to include everything here, plus the date. There's a lot of complexity here, and when you pair it with this little 12-hour subdial that allows you to resolve the alarm down to, I would say, just about 5 minutes, there's very little play in the mechanism, so you can set it precisely. If you want to consider how much complexity you're getting here, I would say that you would need maybe a half dozen Rolex and Tudor models to combine all of the features and all of the complications, the dress watch / formal watch versatility of this Blancpain Leman GMT alarm. If you wanted Rolex and Tudor to accomplish the same thing, you'd probably need 6 watches. That's just perspective, but what you could never get from a Rolex or Tudor product, really anything out of the upper reaches of high horology, is this level of finish. This is the Blancpain caliber 1241G 40-hour power reserve, 407 components, incredibly complex, and yet only 6.2 millimeters thick. Thickness is just another measure of watchmaking competence. At the level of the haute de gamme, thickness really gives you the idea of how good the watchmaker is. Because let's face it, if we all gave ourselves a clock's worth of volume, we could pack in as many complications as we liked. But a Rolex 3135, your basic Submariner automatic movement, is as thick as this GMT doubly auto-winding Blancpain alarm watch with power reserve and on-off indicator. Not only is it thin, but it's fine, beautifully finished, Côte de Genève on the bridges, on the winding rotor, all of the edges of the rotor, the bridges, the levers, the anglage, the drawing, the polish to a mirror sheen is immaculate. This is top of the line with dressage on all wheels, radial and linear alternately. The finish right out to the polished pinion leaves, the teeth of the gears, is inspiring. Examine it under a 20-power loop, it will hold up. In fact, I would argue it's arguably even better under a loop than it is to the naked eye, and the iPhone unfortunately doesn't do it justice. But I will point out this one highlight, which I hope entices you to take a look at the high-res photos on our website, because they can tell you explicitly what I can only suggest. But this hammer, which you saw in action earlier, that activates the chiming mechanism of the alarm, is black polished, reflecting light only in one direction. You can see its color shifts almost like a chameleon. Its reflection is highly dependent on where I'm pointing it, because it only reflects light in one direction due to the immaculate optical finish that's completed with silk and diamond paste. From every other angle, it looks gray or black, hence the term pali noir and the idea of black polish, the highest level of polish, evident not just on that hammer, but on all the screw heads that aren't blued. You could see that the base plate, now I tend to prefer a very tight perlage pattern. When I look at a watch, the tighter, the more even, the finer, the better, and this is like grains of sand, and yet immaculately detailed. Under the loop, it holds up. There's just as much richness, just as much brushing, just as much swirl to each of these little pearls. They're just that much smaller and more tightly spaced. Again, I can't do justice, but the better camera, the one on our website, certainly can. This watch succeeds on every front. As a special edition, it's truly special. As a limited edition, it's truly rare. Take the haute de gamme, the top of high horology, and you're already talking about rarefied air, stratified company. Take this example with its exuberant yellow tones and the lethal combination of the yellow highlights with the lacquered black dial and the white metal case, the versatility of a rubberized leather strap, and I think you're talking about something like the perfect watch. Now, I don't know if this is the watch you want, but I can tell you, having held it and handled it and experienced it firsthand, this Blancpain Leman GMT Alarm East Coast Jewelry 20th Anniversary Edition is in fact the watch I want.